Hi everyone, my name is Giuliana Tiripelli. I am a senior lecturer in journalism at the Montfort University, and my talk is entitled Revitalising Peace in Global Policy Discourses, Journalism Constructive Role After the War in Ukraine. And I'm now going to put on my timer and also switch on and share my slides so that you can see them. Okay. So in recent years, the focus of the debate about journalism has shifted from one about the crisis of journalism itself to one about journalism in crisis. Various institutions, especially international institutions worldwide, or you can think of UN agencies or the Council of Europe, for example, have prioritized campaigns and policies to safeguard the safety and freedom of expression of the journalist. This response is grounded in alarming statistics on the imprisonment, violence, and harassment faced by a lot of journalists worldwide, and it is now extremely visible in the new war in the Middle East between Israelis and Palestinians. While this defensive approach in the policy discourse is undeniably crucial and necessary, it is very important, crucial that we support journalists and their safety. It also calls for an urgent sociological intervention to ensure that a more constructive understanding of the role of journalism in conflict situations is retained in this changing discourse, aiming to support journalists operating in crisis. The crucial question which arises is this: what kind of journalism is being defended in this recent policy approach or policy discourse following the opening, which follows the opening of these new crises, new open conflicts in the global north? My paper examines how I engaged with this debate regarding media and conflicts within an international institution, the Council of Europe, through a time of shifting political priorities. By discussing how European policymakers came to respond to the imperative of supporting journalists in strengthening democracy during crisis at a time of new conflict in Europe, this paper shows how politics reshaped institutional understanding of journalism roles in conflict in subtle, hidden but important ways, and the importance of preserving consensus-building, democratic-based perspective in policymaking, even when we are at war. And it is particularly important for institutions that represent a variety of countries. In 2021, I was commissioned to produce a report exploring how the media responds to catastrophic events or periods of uncertainty and to provide some solutions or recommendations. I was commissioned this by the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe is, as you may know, the deliberative body of the Council of Europe, to which parliamentarians are appointed by the national parliaments of the Assembly's 47 member states. The 27 European Union states are all members of the Council of Europe, as is the UK. So the UK, from a certain perspective, is still in Europe, or is still in pan-Europe. The Council of Europe has therefore a very important balancing international role, also because it's hidden from the front stage that many other international institutions navigate, for example, some UN agencies. And its role is to promote human rights, democracy, and the rule of law across the wider pan-European region, including, as of February 2022, Russia. My report illustrated the ways in which traditional and digital media were used during times of crisis, some of those, let's say, and especially focusing on the COVID pandemic. It explained the complex dynamics for which news media and crisis information could facilitate or hinder understanding among the public, stimulating public debate, analyzing solutions, and facilitating communication. The most important point is that the report overcame ideas of misinformation and disinformation, concept which place the origin of collective information problems in the media themselves, in the content itself. The content is not fact-checked, the content is not quality enough, and so on. The report instead identifies why the sociocultural dynamics triggering misengagement, wrong form of engagement with excellent information, for example, fact-checked investigative journalism of excellent level and extraordinary, excellent, methodologically sound scientific outputs, and how this in turn, despite its brilliant quality, despite its quality, can nourish polarizing and misinformation tendencies, conspiracy theory and fake news. So it's much more complex than fake news and fact-checking. And sociology has a lot to say in these respects. Results of my reports were used to provide a number of recommendations for improving best practice for the media during time of crisis, and these recommendations were included in the resolution number 2419 of 2022, approved by the Parliamentary Assembly for the Assembly's member states to consider and implement accordingly. The approach that I used, just to conclude this part about the report, was based on reviews of previous research about crisis communication, pilot analysis focused on COVID and digital media, and exchanges with experts of science communication, which all illustrated the dangers and the potential benefits of using a variety of media during crisis. The expert advice that gave life to this recommendation is all referenced in the report, and the report is available on the DORA database of the Montfort University. If I have to summarize the main findings in 2 main points, I will say that these are the following. The first is that quality of content alone does not help society, does not help peace, does not help even understanding better, conflict better, etc. This is reinforced in the report by the pilot analysis of YouTuber comments to quality investigative journalism. So comments to an excellent, top quality piece of investigative journalism about the vaccine. The COVID vaccine. Results show that digital users take bits of critical thinking and use this for an exercise in asserting simplistic, for a kind of an exercise, a competition in asserting simplistic views, oppositional views. When citizens are alone in the digital space during crisis, so there is no real community they belong to, or there is just an imagined one with which they can interact, they frantically search for confirmation about their views. They're hungry for establishing a truth of some kind, which is the truth, which is only the truth that fits their existing mental frames, simplified frames and arguments they can comprehend. Whatever doesn't fit those doesn't enter, whatever the quality of the information. So in these, the mental frames, bias, and whatever you want to call them, but it's also the idea of a community behind. Is there a community, yes or no? That makes a difference. What works instead is media spaces that allow for deliberative processes, even on the smallest of the aspect of a crisis, that provide a basis for filling the new needs, new sudden needs that the community, individuals of the communities have, developing shared understanding and reaching new consensus in a situation which is felt as very threatening of existing social rules. This is reinforced by the findings of the pilot analysis in the report of community groups on Facebook during the COVID lockdown. Digital spaces where these are digital spaces where users are not exclusively lonely individuals. They do belong to the same physical community, not just an imagined community of some kind. And they share a community to which they belong and which leave space for their renegotiation of social rules. Much of what was happening in the first few days after the lockdown, first few weeks, was a constant renegotiation of social rules among the people. So the community helped in creating a deliberative process. And yes, quality of information could have made a difference in there, but it was mostly about this community, real community being there. For these reasons and many others that I can summarize here, the report invited institutions to act on these main points, among others. Support community media and direct citizen engagement in educational and social communication during crisis, strengthen the sociological study of journalism and media, use and apply available research. So the idea that there is a lot of research already, we just need to use what is there, review and use. Support and enhance training for journalists to cover social sciences perspectives and journalism coverage of the social aspects of emergencies, not only the so-called scientific aspect of crisis. And facilitating constructive journalism practices that expand journalistic coverage of both local and global contextualizations and narratives, discouraging nationalistic frames in the media. Why that? Because nationalistic ideas are another imagined community which may give more polarization instead of allowing that renegotiations of social rules that I saw in the Facebook COVID group, support group during COVID. These recommendations points aimed at enabling the media to play a vital role in supporting democratic processes during multiple global crises, polycrises, and unprecedented uncertainties. This is the set of a summary of the recommendations included in the resolution instead. So from this, then I will end with a kind of a comparison about what was included and what was excluded. In the resolution, many of my points were included among, and they are listed here. They're more or less all justified and discussed in my report, and I may come back to this in a little while, but I want to move very quickly to the comparative and critical points of the last part, just to conclude the paper in a meaningful way. What was the main difference between the resolution and the report was that in the resolution there was less emphasis on the economic support for all journalists. There was an emphasis on support for broadcast media journalists, mainly in the resolution, differently from my report. There was much less about social cohesion, dynamic sense of community, so much less about the sociological stuff that I tried to put in and that was part of the report. And unfortunately, there was still this residual, hard to live emphasis on fact-checking and quality of information, which by itself, and verification by itself, is not so helpful as we may believe in allowing citizens to navigate crisis, to understand what institutions are trying to do, to trust institutions, and so on. Here at this link, you can see the votes or resolutions. Russia abstained in this vote. Azerbaijan and Austria representatives voted against. So overall, kind of a successful resolution with important recommendations included. But the idea at this point for me was to say, okay, now I've done this so-called impact, but then how do I follow up? How do I go and check how this could be implemented? And the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe doesn't have a real mechanism to check how their non-binding resolutions are being applied. There are no such tool, or not yet. And then something else happened, which is that Russia was expelled from the Council of Europe shortly after voting on this resolution with my recommendation, following the invasion, the attack, the open conflict, the start of the open conflict against Ukraine. And in this context, the Council of Europe inaugurated a new campaign, which is the campaign for the safety of journalists, which is a campaign that is organized by the governmental side of the council, not anymore by the parliament assembly of the same institution. And the focus shifted to a more essentialist approach, or negative defensive approach on the safety of the journalist, which is the main idea I started with in this paper. Now, there are some critical aspects in these shifts. And the first one is that while the focus on the safety of journalists, as I said, remain very crucial and very, very important, by itself, if not contextualized, if left alone, it also represents a loss of sociological depth in understanding the complexity of media roles in crisis and how we can better support journalists to navigate crisis. The report's results show that we need to understand the social underlying needs and mechanisms informing media debates to be able to produce political advice, policy advice that can actually help institutions to use the media, to rely on the media for their work, for solving, navigating crisis, where the crisis is a conflict, bring peace, or solve it in other ways if it's not a conflict. Such focus also delays, make the whole debate and the policies more easily attacked by people who believe, who come from another side. So these policies can be more easily labeled as political in the wider conflict between Europe and Russia. And then the other point, the final point, is that I think there is a touch of ethnocentrism in this sort of approach. So lack of understanding that a lot of our knowledge about how the media could function during crises and conflicts really doesn't come from the global north, but it can come from the global south, where we have a lot of research which has been done over time, over decades, and a lot of journalists who have been working in a variety of countries and developing resilience tools and resilient cultures to navigate conflicts, to operate in very, very difficult situations. So we should also bring them in instead of restarting just because now the political landscape in pan-Europe, in the pan-European region has changed because of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So my new research is heading in this direction, and the direction is to bring together this old knowledge about media and peace, media in conflicts, media development, into policies that are being shaped and campaigns that are being shaped to support journalists operating in the new conflicts or crises of the global north. I've got at least a couple of projects for which I'm putting grant application forward, and I'm always happy to discuss research with anyone who could be interested. Thank you so much for listening until the end, and see you in the QA.